Hi, everybody. This is Addison Shonland from AirInsight, and I'm visiting with my friends from India, Nitin Sarin and Vinny Longani, both from Sarin Company. As I say every time, India's best aviation law firm. Right, guys?
Agree.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again.
It's been some 2 months since we last spoke, and boy, has there been news from India.
Indeed. Indeed.
What happened in Paris? I'm going into Paris. There was all this talk about Air India. Then obviously they confirmed their orders, and then Indigo did that blockbuster order. Tell me about your view from over there.
Well, I think we just, quite frankly, we just stole the show. So, uh, whether that was intentional or not,
Right.
I think it was just, and apart from the aircraft orders, I think it was a real show of strength between the two countries, whether you're looking at India and France, for whatever notional, effect it has. When we were looking at the 500 aircraft order of Indigo, etc., it was just, it's really shown the strong relationship between both the countries.
Right.
No, and just to add to that, you see, the vast majority of aircraft that are inducted by airlines in India are done by way of sale and leaseback. So Indigo placing another 500 aircraft on order, this essentially means they've now got production slots locked for way into the next decade. And, they are what Nitin and I often refer to as like a sale and leaseback factory. So, there's aircraft coming in and there's aircraft going out, and so much so that one would like to say that they've perfected the art of, running an airline and financing aircraft this way to a great extent. So,
Right.
so these orders just ensure that, our airlines have, slots locked in. But for me personally, I think, you see, if you're an aircraft manufacturer and if you have 1,100, almost 1,000 aircraft on order with one airline, Indigo in this case, it just goes to show how much confidence Airbus has in the Indian market, and also with the fact, how Indigo is run. And similarly, having another, well, if you look at, we often talk about exposure of lessors to markets from a risk standpoint. If you were to look at, the exposure that Airbus has to the Indian market, 1 in every 5 A320 aircraft is headed to India or something like that. So
Right.
it's crazy, but it also, again, reaffirms the fact that, we're going to be the market going forward. And in this case, one is a very well-established, well-run, low-cost airline, and the other one is backed by a group which is known the world over. So, these are people who have the acumen to run great airlines, even if they might not make money, at least in the near term. So overall, yeah, it's great.
The thing that intrigued me when I came back from Paris, I remember I was actually in the room at Paris when they did the announcement for Indigo. My friends at Airbus said to me, "You do not want to miss this announcement." So, like, okay, I and the rest of my ilk sat down to see what was happening, and the statement made by the CEO was, "This is just the beginning." And that resonated with me. I thought, what does he mean? What's the context? And as you guys know, I love my data stuff. So I went away and I thought, how do I look at this? Now, I came up with a crazy notion of, look at the population of India. Now, the Indian economists many years ago did this great thing where they said more people travel by India by train in one day than fly in a year. Now, of course, that's some time ago. I would imagine that ratio has changed, but I mean, it could be, more people travel in 1 week by train now than fly in a year. Well, that's still a huge ratio. So I came up with this notion of looking at the national population of certain markets and looking at the active airline fleet. I used some data from CH Aviation, which is really good stuff. And here's the interesting thing. And you guys may have seen it. But essentially, if you look at Canada, they have one airliner in the active airline in the fleet for every 33,000 people. Okay, so that's the highest the highest ratio that I came across, or the lowest ratio, depending which word, the best ratio. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at somewhere like the USA, it's one airliner for every 37,000 people. I'm just looking at my table here. The UK, one airliner for every 77,000 people. Germany, one airplane for every 114,000 people. Do you know what the number is for India?
I wouldn't be surprised that
number.
it's very
Okay.
high or very low.
Put your seatbelt on. One airliner for every 1.6 million people.
True.
Yeah.
And then you might say, well, you know, China's the test here. Well, in China, it's one airliner for every 330,000 people. So you would look at that and you would say, well, just to be, you know, to be like China, you would have to take that number of your 861 active airplanes in India. You'd have to like quadruple that number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Quadruple that number.
That's correct. And when you look at the, you know, the model that's being followed, let's just say by Indigo, to expand their fleet exponentially, the orders are going to be in the thousands.
Correct.
Because we know that they keep it only for the sweet spot. So, you know, a 500 aircraft order doesn't mean they're going to have 500 aircraft for a long, long time. They're going to need to order thousands of aircraft to have a fleet of 500. So it's interesting times.
Nitin, something that I noticed looking at some other data, you look at an airline, I'm not going to name the name because obviously I would get my fingers spanked and maybe spanked in other ways. Here's an airline that buys a MAX for $45 million. Never mind the sticker price, because sticker prices don't mean a thing. They take delivery of the MAX 8 at $45 million. They do a sale and lease back like Vinny was talking about, and they get they get the airplane for 40 million. They do a sale and lease back at 45.
Mm-hmm.
And they bank the difference right now.
Yep.
So if we say that Indigo is doing this, it's a very well-known process. The question, of course, is going to be which lessors are going to, now this speaks to your confidence of Airbus, right? So which lessors are going to jump in and take this, basically buy this risk? And then the other thing, of course, is knowing that the airplane's only going to be in service for like less than a decade, which is half the time that many airlines will fly these airplanes, which means that the secondhand value, the residual value of the airplane is going to be pretty impacted. You know, secondhand market for a 737 is much stronger than a secondhand market for a 320 because there are so many 320s around. And the 320 does not have a second life as a freighter, whereas the 737 does. Lots of moving parts here to consider, and absolutely fascinating. One other thing I want to talk about here that I've noted on our site post Paris, there was one of the Indian journalists asked Airbus in the meeting, asked Guillaume Fourie, when are you going to put in a FAL in India? And I thought that was actually the right question asked the wrong way. The question should have been, when are you going to put in a FAL? Because there's no way Airbus at its current rate, even if they take the existing stuff that they have, the various FALs they have, and they drive that up to 70 a month, they don't have enough production capacity to meet the Indian demand, never mind everybody else.
Yeah, well, I guess you see, aircraft production is now sort of like, Airbus and the Tatas are going to manufacture this transport aircraft in Ahmedabad. So that's going to start happening now. Airbus and Boeing have manufactured parts in India for the longest time. They've got engineering teams in India. So I think, I think it's inevitable that these aircraft will be essentially assembled here. That's what they are, because their parts are made the world over. But I think this current sort of facility in Gujarat is going to be like a testing ground, because we've got to fine tune customs procedures, supply chains, parts coming in, parts going out. All of that is, so it's untested waters. So the orders have been placed, but I would like to think that this is going to be the test case, and
Right.
that's when if it all works, that's the next sort of leap would be to sort of like manufacture commercial airliners here.
And I think we're looking at it very myopically from an aviation point of view. The larger picture, without a doubt, is the political angle to this. The ability to bring in talent, the ability to bring in foreign exchange, the ability to generate revenue, jobs, etc., is a very, very, very attractive and lucrative aspect for any government to bring in. And sooner than later, this is something that's going to be at the forefront, where they're going to say, very similar to the dispute that we're having, well, not dispute per se, but regarding electric vehicles, where they're saying you're more than welcome to come as long as you manufacture them here. Of course, it won't be the same. It won't be the same level of dispute per se, because we're talking about aircraft versus vehicles, but it will be very similar. There will be a lot of pressure on the manufacturers to set up shop within the country.
And I think that Vinny alluded to when talking about the supply chain. I would imagine it won't be long before GE and Pratt and Rolls-Royce also need to do something in India, because quite honestly, the market capacity is obviously in need. And, it's not like India doesn't have the skill set. They may not have the historic knowledge base, but they have the engineering talent. If they're given the blueprints, go and build this, please, they can do it. So I think that India becomes, by all kinds of measures, a very critical part of the global aviation industry because of this.
No, and I think also what we need to look at now is, you see, for Indian airlines per se, operating flights within the country, you more or less make money 2 quarters and you lose money in the other 2 quarters. So it's like a net zero game. If one was, unless of course, like, impacted by fuel prices more and, just the high operating costs. But operating flights overseas is really where you make the money, because you've got a foreign point of sale. You can sell in a foreign currency, which helps you offset your dollar costs to a great extent. And so that is what is going to be the next leap for both Indigo and for Air India. You see, Indigo is now starting flights to Nairobi. Indigo Vistara is going to Mauritius. So Indigo is going to return to China, the Stans, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all these places where our airlines never really went in the past. They're going to start venturing abroad, because obviously there's like a huge market, of middle-class people who'd want to travel, but also is because, you're able to sell flights from overseas. It's widely known the most lucrative market for Air India is actually the North American market. And, yes, there's a whole debate about Russian airspace or no Russian airspace. That aside, that market is so lucrative that they continue to grow and add capacity in that market. So Indigo will add capacity using the aircraft fleet that they have, with the XLR coming in, they'll fly further into Europe. And Air India, for instance, with the wide body aircraft, will fly even further and add more places. Australia, for instance, as it stands, we just have 1 flight a day from Delhi to Sydney and Melbourne. That's it. And there's a huge diaspora in Australia, so there's all these multiple points. It's fascinating. I was speaking to somebody at, Airbus the other day, and they said, look at Chennai and Perth. Indigo would be able to operate an A321 XLR and connect India to Australia just by flying it from Chennai to Perth. And it's not difficult at all for them to hub out of Chennai, because they've got so many flights to every station. You see what I mean?
Sure.
So it's fascinating what's happening, and it's really, it is going forward going to be like our golden period, provided everything falls into place.
Sure. As long as the long as the bureaucrats can get out of the way of the entrepreneurs, right? Well, isn't that the
And provided we stop prohibiting lessors to take aircraft back.
right? Vinny, you brought up airlines. Let's talk about Go. And a jet, of course, is now collapsed, right? Is that official?
No, it's not. It's not technically not official thus far, but it's the end is fairly clear as to what's going to happen. But with Go, it was a bit of a similar sad story. The only difference was that they went themselves to the insolvency court, saying that they are unable to pay their debts. So please put us through the process, the insolvency process. So that's where they stand, and that brings up a very deadly moratorium period, which is basically like a gag freeze order, where no one can do anything. You can't take back assets, you can't terminate agreements, you can't. You virtually, they give you a 330-day window where no one can touch the airline. Very similar to what you have in the US.
With Chapter 11.
Chapter 11, yes. So that's where we are currently, but it brings up a very interesting the whole battle between lessors and the airline is essentially around termination of leases. So there were most of the leases to Go were terminated prior to this order coming into force, but there was no deregistration that happened by the aviation authority.
Right.
So that's where the battle is going on in court. The whole question will be is the termination was valid. So can the aviation authority keep these aircraft registered in India? Of course, there are a number of arguments on both sides that have been placed, and they're scheduled to continue on the 3rd of August. Right. But overall, this has been, at least for the aircraft leasing community, it has been a fairly large blot on our reputation. So right. On the one hand, we have these fantastic orders that are coming and going, and on the other hand, we have pretty much the worst it can get. So right. we are kind of just riding the wave at the moment.
Right. My colleague and I at the show had a long conversation with Pratt & Whitney about their perspective on this, and boy, were they're angry. You know.
They are, yes.
Yeah.
They've been used as the well, I wouldn't call it a scapegoat, but the airline has basically used their inability to provide engines as the reason why they have been unable to pay debt.
Well, the interesting thing that Pratt is telling us is that it would help if the airline would pay its bills. They said that firstly their situation has turned around. They're now sending out more engines for delivery than were coming back. So they've turned the corner on that issue. And the second issue is that the airline took delivery, GoJet took their first delivery in 2016, and they made a 2016 payment, but from 2017 until very recently, they weren't paying Pratt & Whitney for engines. And so the fact that Pratt would share that information is, I think, an indication of the annoyance of their brand being dragged through the Indian media and the legal system as if they are somehow to blame for this, which is really quite amazing. That brings us up. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say it is, look, what they're doing is completely within their right under law. It's just a strange game they've played, which is fairly smartly, played out. But it can harm the industry more than it can cause any benefit to them. Right. So I think the government is aware of that, and let's see what happens in the next couple of weeks, because right. On the one hand, you have the world's best credit, which is Indigo, and on the other hand, you have Go that's going through this right. process right now. So
I'm sure you will agree with me certainly from your professional viewpoint that dragging dirty laundry in the public is never a winning game, never a winning play.
Never.
So I think that the fact that we've gotten to where we are is indicative of the crisis, the level of crisis here. It's just not a good situation. That brings us, I guess, to the thing here about the Cape Town Convention. And people remember Kingfisher was a big problem in its day.
Mhm.
And there are probably still some Airbuses parked with Kingfishers paint job on them, without engines, but hulks over there. What is India's situation in honoring the Cape Town Convention?
Well, we're pretty much where we were uh, before the whole Go Airlines and SpiceJet situation. SpiceJet regarding, the 2014-15 issues that they had. We are pretty much at the stage of the government reintroducing a bill before the parliament to make it a proper law. So we are stuck with a very strange situation where we have committed to an international treaty, but we haven't implemented it properly into local law. So as long as we have this local law that trumps the treaty, the local law will always apply. And that's precisely where we are currently, which shows an extreme need for us to act promptly to get this act passed by both houses of parliament to become a law.
This brings me back to hearing you say that. I mean, you think about what Vinny was saying about the sale and lease back at Indigo. There's going to be somebody who's going to want to do the lease back deal, but absent protection, they're going to sit this one out.
Absolutely. I mean, there's the world is very, very, very concerned, and from our business perspective, it's increased our work. I wouldn't say tremendously, but we are getting questions, left, right, and center, because people are scared. Right.
Well, you're in the protection game. That's good for some people, right?
That's correct. But as I was telling Vin, I've told him several times during our discussions that when you're young and all fiery, it's a lot of fun. But as you start getting grayer, your hair on your head starts getting grayer.
Are you trying to tell me something?
It gets a tad bit frustrating to see the same, to keep falling in the same pit,
right,
the same pit again and again.
I want we've had a great conversation here, and I have one more question to discuss with you guys, which is the merging of Air India and Vistara. And now, you've got the Air India brand. It is what it is. It's trying to be reinvented. Everybody cheers that, because why not? But you've got this pristine Vistara. And Vinny, I've seen you rave about your experiences in seat 1A. Why not?
Why not?
Tell me how, you've got a company. Tata has spent a lot of money building Vistara and building a pristine product, pristine brand. Why would you give up that and stuff it into the Air India brand, which is a little bit more, shall we say, it's less shiny. It's not as new, it's less shiny. It seems to me like a strange thing. How does that play out?
Well, from my personal perspective, it doesn't make sense, to be very honest. But I'm going to let Vin take this. He's much more into the whole Air India Vistara thing. I'll confine my thing to the legal aspects.
Yeah, you see, you need to understand the history of Air India and the Tata Group, and and JRD Tata, who's often referred to as the father of Indian aviation. So you see, Air India was a Tata airline before it was nationalized and taken over by the government of India. So you see, this airline, not in its current shape and form, of course, because they've seen decades of underinvestment under the government, and things have of course not been up to the mark. But for the group, you see, and I don't speak for them, I'm just looking at it from a legacy standpoint. This is JRD Tata's legacy, Air India. At least not the airline, like I said, as it stands, but what it stood for. It was the first airline, the first Asian airline to induct a jet aircraft. At one point in time, when these Fifth Freedom flights were there, people used to want to fly Air India, between Europe and America at one point in time. And across the world, there were these round the world, routes which Air India operated, like many other airlines. So you see, I think, and it's more to do with restoring their legacy than anything else. And when you look at Vistara, while they're a great airline and possibly the best airline, the best full service airline in the country as of date, but if you look at the market abroad, Vistara only ever flies to a bunch of regional destinations and a couple of handful of destinations in Europe. You see, the brand that India is known for overseas is still Air India. And when you couple the two together, and also the fact that Singapore Airlines and Tata's wanted to buy Air India in the past, and that deal never sort of worked out, and which is why they sort of started Vistara in the first place. So I guess the end game was to have Air India, which they do now, and one would like to even sort of say that in my opinion, they got a great deal when they bought the airline, and they want to sort of have one airline, and that is Air India.
Last question. Air India has its place in the market, its image. Vistara has its image. My sense of it is that Vistara's image is going to descend more than Air India's image is going to rise.
In the interim, yes. I mean, till the time all the issues at Air India are fixed. And you see, whenever everyone looks at that, a large part of a customer's experience at an airline depends on the aircraft, right? And the entertainment, the seats, the mood lighting, etc. Now, in this case, they've gone ahead and they've ordered all these aircraft, but the deliveries only happen when they do. So in the interim, all you can do is sort of try and fix what you've got and make do with it. So what you're saying is correct, that, should this merger go through whenever it does, it's going to make look Vistara as it was. Overall, it might not be a good thing to begin with, but yes, in a couple of years, once Air India has been fixed and all these new aircraft come in and they've got all the fancy bells and whistles and the lounges have been refurbished, etc. So then it'll start to come together. But in the interim, it's going to be a mishmash of airlines and products and ex-Delta aircraft and ex-Etihad aircraft, and we're getting a bunch of ex-Aeroflot planes. They're basically out there shopping, and they want whatever aircraft are available to add capacity. And that's the best that they can do.
It's going to be interesting. Gentlemen, it's been lovely to talk with you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise.
And hopefully we will chat soon.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you.